Good morning, Shavua Tov. They tell a story about a man who walked into the Chase Manhattan Bank, the one in Manhattan, and he asked if he could borrow $1,000 for 1 month. The bank manager said, "Let me run your credit and see if we could lend you the $1,000. After checking his credit, he said, "Sure, no problem, we could lend you the $1,000, but we're going to need a collateral." He said, "Okay." He says, "I have my Rolls Royce parked in the garage. Here's the keys to the Rolls Royce. You could hold on to it as a collateral." Bank manager said, "A Rolls Royce as collateral for a $1,000 loan for 1 month? No problem." He tells his assistant, "Put the Rolls Royce in the employee's garage." He writes him out a check for $1,000. 1 month later, the fellow comes back. He meets with the bank manager. He says, "Here's the $1,000. How much do I owe you for interest?" He says, "Well, we gave you a 6% interest rate. It's been a month. You owe us $4.70 with all the different charges." He gives him $4.70. He takes out the keys to the Rolls Royce. He gives it back to him. And as he's about to leave, the bank manager says, "I just don't understand." He says, "We checked your credit score, your report. You seem to be a well-to-do, wealthy man. You drive a Rolls Royce. Why did you need to borrow $1,000 for a month?" And the man looks at him and says, "What do you think? I got wealthy by wasting money?" He said, "I needed to go on vacation for 1 month. Tell me, where can I find in Manhattan parking for a month for $4.70? Sometimes a person's motivation is not always apparent. Yesterday we read the Torah portion of Noach. The majority of the Torah portion was the story of Noach and the flood. But at the end of the portion, we had the story of the Tower of Babel, a group of individuals who settled in Babylonia, which is now Iraq, and a place called Shinar in the valley, and they decided they wanted to build a tower that will reach the heavens. And God says, "Let me go down and see what they're doing." And God confuses their languages and foils their plan to build this tower. And all the commentaries ask, what was it that they were attempting to do? What was their motivation after the flood to build a tower to reach the heavens? And why did God foil their plan? And one of the many explanations was that after they witnessed the flood, they said, "How are we going to survive if there's another flood again? Let us build a tower which goes towards the heavens, all the way up high, so that if there's another flood, we could scale the tower and go to higher ground and save ourselves from the flood." So why did God destroy the tower? Because God said, "You failed to learn the message of the flood." The flood wasn't some natural occurrence, something that happened by chance. There was a message God was trying to communicate to mankind, that they needed to change their ways and not be corrupt and wicked and commit acts of theft and violence against one another. And this group of people failed to internalize that most vital message of the flood, and that they needed to heed the 7 Noahide laws. Rather, they figured, how can we come up with some new innovation, some new technological advance to be able to overcome the threat of a future flood? And this is the message of the story of the Tower of Babel. That yes, man has to use his ingenuity to overcome the challenges of the day. But at the same time, always remember that whatever happens in life is a message. Don't just write it off to chance, to bad luck, to coincidence, to circumstance. The way we lead our lives could be either in a way that everything that happens, we try to find the message from God in it to us, or we could say this was our bad fortune, or we were unlucky, or this is what happened because of my zodiac or my horoscope or some other circumstance, or some bad decision I made led me to this circumstance, rather than see the miracle of God communicating to you through your daily life. And as we go through COVID-19, of course we have to look for vaccines, and we have to find ways to find remedies and cures for this deadly virus. But at the same time, we have to ask ourselves, what is the message God is trying to send to us? Because like the flood, things like this that affect the whole world especially have to have a message. And clearly, if we fail to learn what God is saying to us, and we just focus on the scientific challenges and trying to overcome it, we will have failed to realize why we went through this experience. Clearly, God is trying to teach us to be humbler. not to be so arrogant, not to believe in our own prowess and think that we in the 21st century could conquer everything. With all of our science and technology, there's no challenge we can't overcome. God showed us that we're just mortals, humble creatures, and we have to act with humility towards God. God also showed us that we're also one, no matter what race, color, religion, which part of the world we live in. Disease knows no borders and boundaries, and we are all affected by the same circumstances, and therefore we have to treat every person equally and recognize the humanity and the godly image in every human being. God has taught us through this plague that we should show more compassion and less anger, more care and concern for others, more selflessness and less selfishness. I have to tell you that we've talked about the miracles that have been happening in the Middle East. Sudan now agreed to make peace with Israel, following after Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. That's 3 peace accords within 2 months, reshaping the future of the Middle East in a most unusual way, just like 2020 vision. The year 2020, no one could have seen the coronavirus coming. No one could have seen what has been happening in the Middle East. And more countries are lining up to make peace with Israel. And after 72 years of the Palestinians refusing to make peace with Israel, Israel is now reaching out to other parts of the Middle East and making peace with these Arab countries. And the Palestinians are furious, as they said to the United Arab Emirates, and they said to Bahrain, you put a knife in our back. But really what they're doing is they're telling the Palestinians it's time to make peace with Israel. Enough is enough with this foolishness. We need to come together. But I have to tell you something. The chief negotiator for the Palestinians, Abba Eban famously said the Palestinians never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. For 72 years, Israel is begging them to make peace, offering them every opportunity. But the Palestinians have refused time and again. And not only that, they've responded with harsh violence. And as you remember in 2002, during the Oslo days, when buses and cafes were being blown up almost on a daily basis, and there were scores and scores of casualties, of deaths throughout Israel. And Israel was trying desperately to make peace. And the Oslo Accords was the violent response after Arafat rejected the Accords. And the chief negotiator is a 65-year-old Palestinian man by the name of Saeb Erekat. And Saeb Erekat was so vicious that during 2002, when the suicide bombers were coming into Israel, Israel sent its soldiers into Jenin to root out the terrorists. And if you remember, there was a violence, and the Palestinians put their men, women, and civilians, children on the front lines, and there were 55 Palestinians were killed and 23 Israeli soldiers. And the Palestinians started to accuse Israel of causing a massacre in Jenin, and the chief propagandist and spokesperson for the Palestinian Authority was this individual by the name of Saeb Erekat. And he went on national news accusing Israel of committing a massacre in Jenin, and international headlines were condemning Israel for this massacre in Jenin when really it was just an act of self-defense. But he, Saeb Erekat, went on to become the right-hand man of Mahmoud Abbas, and every peace deal that was offered to Israel. If you remember, Olmert and Barak offered 98% of the West Bank in seeking peace. And he was the one who was always at the negotiating table rejecting it time and again. And earlier this year, just a few months ago, in August, when the UAE made peace with Israel, Erekat was the one who said, they put a knife in our back, and condemned these peace accords. And in early summer of this year, in July, the United Arab Emirates, even before they made peace with Israel, sent 2 plane loads of supplies to help the victims of COVID-19 in the Palestinian territories. And these 2 plane loads landed in Ben Gurion Airport to be shipped to the Palestinian territories. And Saeb Erekat refused to accept these 2 plane loads of masks, ventilators, medicine, and supplies for the patients who were suffering in the Palestinian hospitals with COVID-19, because he said since it landed in Ben Gurion Airport, he does not want to receive it. He turned these planes back and let his people die. Well, guess where Ze'ev Erkat is right now? Just a few weeks ago, he himself contracted COVID-19. And when his condition worsened, he was transported to Hadassah Ein Kerem Hospital in Jerusalem. And right now, he is a patient in Hadassah in Jerusalem himself. And because of his previous medical conditions, including a lung transplant that he had in 2017, his situation is very severe, so much so that he is on life support in Hadassah Hospital right now. And the staff at Hadassah Hospital say that their policy is that they treat every patient in their hospital like they are the only patient. It doesn't matter if they're Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, and they are doing everything in their power to save his life. Now, I don't know how you feel about his prognosis, but I hope and I pray that he recovers. Because maybe, when he recovers and he wakes up in Hadassah Ein Kerem Hospital and he realized that Jewish Israeli doctors saved his life, maybe he'll internalize the message of COVID-19. Maybe he'll realize it's time to stop fighting Israel and partner with Israel. He'll realize the hypocrisy of his ways, of his words, of his deeds. And maybe he will be the lightning rod to turn around the horrible, vicious anti-Semitism and hatred of Palestinians towards Israelis. And he will become the model for other Palestinians of the double standard that their leaders have, oppressing their own people while using Israel to their own benefit. Let us all realize why God sent us this plague. We'll never understand fully, but we have to ask ourselves, what can I learn from this? When this is all over, how will I be a better person? How will I have gained and grown from this experience? And if we do that, then unlike the people of the Tower of Babel, who just thought it was a technological problem that had to be overcome with some new innovation and creative ingenuity, we will realize that yes, we have to do what's in our power, that God gave us resources to overcome challenges. But at the same time, when something monumental like this happens that affects each and every one of our lives, it was meant to bring us together and make us better. It's sad to see how COVID-19 is often used as a weapon to divide us, when really we should realize that it's meant to bring us together as human beings, as so many have used this opportunity to express more love, compassion, care for others, and have recognized that we are all fragile and we are all frail human beings. And every day that we have our health and we have our well-being, we have to be filled with gratitude towards Hashem and never take anything, including a breath of fresh air, for granted. Have a wonderful day and a Shavua Tov.